Welcome back to our C Sharp Absolute Beginner tutorial. In the previous lesson, we looked at the for loop. We had earlier looked at the while loop, and in the previous lesson, we looked at the for loop. And we said we did talk about the three different ways you can create loops. We said there was the while loop, the for loop, and the for each loop. Now, the for each loop that's for each like this. The for each loop is usually used to go through or to loop through items of a collection. That's collection is spelled like this, items of a collection. Now, the reason why I want to defer looking at the for each loop is because you have to understand collections before you would really understand how the for each loop works. So in this lesson, we're going to skip the for each loop and we're going to look at collections. And to be more precise, or to be more specific, we'll look at a particular type of collection that's the most simple and the most basic type of collection, which is arrays. Okay, so in this lesson we're going to look at arrays. Arrays, what are arrays? Arrays are actually variables. You remember we looked at variables. That's for you to declare. We said variables are just like a variable is like a store or a box within your computer memory, right? Where you declare, when you declare a variable, you're telling the computer, please reserve me some space. So that space, we're just giving it an analogy to a box. Well, you're telling the computer, reserve me a box, and then you usually give the box a name so that whenever you call, if you need to access that box, you just call the name. So for example, and we also said you have to tell the computer what kind of data you're going to be storing inside the box. So that's just what a variable is used for. So for example, if I say int x, for example, and then I add the semicolon, we're telling the computer that store me, give me, spare me a box. Okay, I'm going to call that box x, and I'll be storing integer data types inside that box. Okay, so now what you've just done is you have created an int variable. Okay, a variable that can store integer data types. Now we also said in our variables lesson, we said when you declare a variable, you can only store that particular type of data type that you declare for it throughout your program, or let's say throughout the lifetime of that variable that you created. That's throughout the scope of that variable. Okay, let's go ahead and fire up Visual Studio. Let's open our application. This is the solution. Open it. I think at this moment we're beginning to have so much junk commented out. I think if you still want to keep all this code that we wrote in the previous lesson, maybe you should just save it and then create a new application, create a new program. Okay, so you work on a fresh new program, because I'm just going ahead and move everything there so we have a clear new program to write. Okay, so I just took us to the revision of what a variable is. So you can create a variable like this. So now you can only store a particular integer data type inside this x. For example, how do you do that? You can do that by saying x equals 45, for instance. Okay, now you stored 45 inside x. Okay, x is a variable. What if you want to store another number inside x, or another integer? You do that by saying x assign me 10, for example. Now notice what happens if you execute this. By the time you execute this line of code, the 45 that you have stored earlier inside this x variable goes away. It just disappears into oblivion, okay? Because you've removed, whenever you try to store something inside that x variable that you declared, what was stored in it initially is going to go away, okay? It's not like it's going to be stored somewhere else or stashed some. No, it just goes away, and 10 is what is stored inside this variable at this point in your program, okay? Now that brings us to the use of arrays. Now arrays are no they are like variables, right? They are variables. However, arrays are variables that allow you to store more than one data, okay, inside one single array variable, okay. You can think of array as a collection of boxes. You can, if you remember, we said a variable is like a box. That's a normal variable, is like a box where you can store a data. Okay. Now an array, think of it like a collection of boxes given a single name where you can store multiple items inside. Now, for the arrays, you also declare them the way you declare variables, okay? In that you specify the types of data you're going to be storing. Now, let me just stop with all the explanation and just show you how you declare an array. So, for example, now, say we want to create an array that stores integers. Now that's something you should know. You cannot create an array that stores a combination of integers and floating point numbers and strings, okay? You can only store one particular type of data type, okay? Even though you can store several integers into the array. When you say an array is going to hold integer values, it's only integer values you can keep inside those boxes, okay? So this is how you declare an array. You first write the data type. Now I'm using int. Of course there is float, string, bool, if you remember. Now I'm using int, so I'm saying the data type is int. I'm going to be storing integer data types. Now the next thing you do in declaration of arrays is you use a square bracket. I know we haven't encountered this square bracket. It's funny, we have actually seen an array before, but we don't even know it was an array. If you look at your static void main declaration of this method, look at this string. Look at it. It's string, and then you remember what string is. It's a normal data type, and then it's followed by these square brackets, meaning that this string declaration is for an array, which means args. This args is the name of the data type, that is the name of the variable that holds the array, okay? So this is the variable. Now the same with integers. You just write the int square brackets. You can give a space or not. I don't think it matters. In C#, spaces don't really matter. So you follow it with the name of the variable or the name of the array. So let's call it my integer array, okay? And you end it with a semicolon, okay? Even if you don't add a space here, it's still correct, but it's always good to space out you separate your declaration from that's the data type of what you're declaring from the name of the variable. So now my integer array is a declaration of an array, okay? Now that means that my integer array, I've said, is going to be a box or a series of boxes that can hold integer data types, okay? Now this is not the end of this declaration. Okay, let's say we've declared it. This is the end of the declaration. However, for arrays, unlike integers, if you remember normal variables, once I say something like int x, right? I can immediately start using my variable. I can say x, assign it 45, for example, right? I can use my variable immediately in the next line. However, for arrays, that is not the case. Okay, so that's something you should know. For arrays, first you have to declare the array, then next you have to tell the computer how many boxes is this array going to hold. Okay, that is how many different data types can these, how many different values can this array hold. Okay, so that's what we're going to do in the next line. We're going to tell the computer or the compiler how many different values can this my integer array hold. Okay, so we do that by writing, first we write the name of um, the array, my integer array. Then you put the equal sign and then you use the new keyword. Okay, this is called initialization of an array, new. And then you put you write your square brackets. Okay, okay, no, before the square bracket you have to write an int. That's the data type. Okay, this data type, you have to write it. And then now notice the difference here. You just write the square bracket without anything in between, but here where you are telling the computer how many boxes this array is going to hold, you are going to write the number of boxes that or the number of values that this array can hold. Okay, so let's say I write 10 inside. Okay, and then I end it with a semicolon. Now notice something. This number in here has to be a whole number. It cannot be a negative number. Yeah, it has to be a natural number. A natural number being 0 upwards. Okay, 0, 1, 2, and it has to be a whole number. Okay, it can't be a negative number because it doesn't make sense to say computer, reserve me an array that holds -3 values. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, so it's from 0 you can say, okay, this is my array, reserve me an array that can hold 0 values. That doesn't also make sense to me, because why would you create the array in the first place if it's not going to hold anything? Okay, so I think to make more sense, we could say for the array to make a lot of sense, or for it to be really useful, it has to be from 1 upwards. Okay, for here we're saying 10 because we want this my integer array to be able to hold 10 different values. Now by writing this, notice the difference between this my integer array and x. X here can only hold 45. If we try to put any other integer inside x, it's going to clean the 45. Okay, however, for my integer array, I can now do things like this. I can say my integer array 0. Okay, the indices start from 0 to 9. Okay, now that is something that you need to be careful with arrays. If you declare an array that holds 10 values, okay, now there is what we call the index of the array, meaning you know, since it's going to store 10 values, it has 10 different slots. Okay, the first slot is going to be indexed slot 0. Okay, that's what I've just written here. To access that slot, you first write the name of the array variable, my integer array, and then you follow it with a square bracket. Inside the square bracket, you write the index of the slot. Now, since the first slot is slot 0, it means there can never be a slot 10. Okay, if you try to access slot 10, even though you won't get an error, you won't get a syntax error here. If you try to run that program, believe me, it's going to crash. Okay, because you're trying to access a box that does not exist in your array. Okay, So that is what you need to keep in mind. If you declare an array that holds 10 different slots, then the indices for the slots are from 0 to 9. So the last index for the slot is slot 9. So I'm going to use my integer array 9 to indicate the last slot, since it has only 10 slots. Okay, let's continue. Now if I want to store something inside this slot 0, I just say my integer array square bracket 0, assign it, I can say 2 and put my semicolon. Okay, now this means that I am telling the computer to store the value 2 inside slot 0 of this array. Okay, now I can go ahead and do something like my integer array 1, which means slot 1 is assign it let's say 50, for example. Now okay, I have a misspelling here. I think I added an S, so let's remove that. Okay, so now what this means is that I'm telling the computer store 50 inside slot 1 of this array. Now what happens? You realize that for using my integer array only, this is one single variable. However, I'm storing more than one values inside it. Okay, unlike a normal variable that can only store one value inside it. Okay, the array can store as many as the number of boxes or the number of slots you initialize it with. Okay, so this line is the line that initializes the array. So this initialization of an array. Okay, and this line is the what we call the declaration of an array. Okay, so that's something you should know. If you declare an array, before you can use or access the slots in the array, you have to initialize that array. You initialize the array by telling the computer how many slots are going to be available in that array. Okay, and then you can now go ahead and start using the slots. Okay, now I can also do something like my integer array 9, okay, is equal to 34, for example. Okay, of course you don't have to populate the array according to the number. Okay, you can choose, in fact you can go randomly and just be populating the array, it doesn't matter. Okay, what you should just know is that you cannot, okay, access a slot that supersedes the number of slots specified by your initialization statement. That's this statement. That means that I cannot do something like my integer array 10 equals say 20, for example. Now notice what happens. Look at this. There is no error, meaning you can actually run this program. Okay, there is no syntax error. However, be careful. This is what we call it will land you in what we call I think out of bounds error or something like that. Yeah, stack overflow. Okay, because the reason is because you are overflowing the stack. Notice there is only 9 slots. Sorry, there are 10 slots, 0 to 9. But however, you're trying to access slot 10. Slot 10 is item number 11. Okay, since we started counting from 0, it means slot 10 is item number 11. In fact, let's try and run this program and see what happens. Okay, let's run it and see what happens. We expect to see a crash. Exactly, look at it, it just crashed and it's telling you system.index out of range exception. Index was outside the bounds of the array. Okay, so that's something you should always be careful with when you use your array. Always make sure that you do not use an index that exceeds the number of boxes that you initialize for the array. Okay, now let's remove this line and run the program and see what happens. Okay, we expect to see exactly the program runs and successfully ends. Okay, you can go ahead and let's just populate everything in this array. I'm going to reduce the number to 5 because I don't want to go all the way from 0 to 10. Let's go 2. Let's copy this and paste it down here. Let's call this 3. By the way, if you try to populate, for example, if I say 35 here, if I try to populate item box 2, that's the box with index 2 of this my integer array, after I have already populated it, that is not an error. Okay, what happens is that this 35 goes in there and substitutes this 34, so the 34 goes away and I lose completely that value. Okay, so that's something you should also know. So I'll just use that as 3, and then this will be 4, and then this will be 5. Oh, I just I just forgot. So you see how easy it is to forget and go into out of range exception. Okay, so always be careful. It's 0 to 4 when the number of boxes is 5. Now, just to prove my point, I'm going to let the computer display this on the console.writeLine. So let's choose a particular box of my integer array. Let's choose box number 3. Okay, so we expect to see it print 35. Console.writeLine, my integer array will use number 3, right? Number 3. Okay, and we expect to see 35 within. By the way, if you want to access that, you want to use whatever is stored inside this array, you have to first write the name of the array and then follow it with a square bracket and then the index of the box. Remember, an array has multiple boxes, so you always have to specify the index of the box. Okay, so we expect to see 35 written. Let's go ahead and run this program and see what happens. Exactly 35. There it is. Okay, we can also change this. Let's change it to 0, and what gets written 2. Okay, because we stored 2 inside box 0. Okay, so I believe this is the basic thing you need to know about the array. Okay, okay, we only looked at integer array. Remember also, this could have also been float. Like I said, we can actually change this. In fact, we've been using integers all over our program. Let's, for a change this to float. Okay, my integer array, and that means we have to change this to float. Okay, we're saying create an integer, okay, it doesn't matter, we're still calling it integer array, but maybe we should change it. Let's say my float array. It doesn't really matter, right? But it's always good to write names that make sense. Okay, so we'll change integer to float, integer to float, integer to float, integer to float, and finally this integer to float. And then where we're going to display the array, we also change the name. So I just changed the name of the array to my float array, and then instead of storing integers, let's use 2.3 f. Let's not forget our f to indicate it's a floating point number. 50.5 f, 34.2 f, 35 34.1f and 34.098f. Okay, so we've decided to store these floating point numbers inside this float array. Okay, we've changed the array to float. I just want to show you that it's also possible to create a floating point array. The same thing with bool. This could have also been bool. Okay, that means you're storing boolean arrays. You could have done it with strings. Okay, now it means that you can create an array of any data type. Okay, it doesn't matter the type of data type. All you need to do is just make sure you follow these steps. So first you declare the array, telling it the type of data type, and then you initialize the array by telling it how many boxes or how many number of values can that array store, and then finally you can go ahead and use your array. In fact, let's run this. Let's not use 2, let's use 4, okay, to see what gets displayed. So we expect to see 34.098. Okay, there it is, 34.098. So this is the explanation of what an array is. I hope people understood. I'll end the lecture here.